Today we are going to be working with adding and subtracting negative numbers. I want to start off with a simple problem that is very elementary, and I'm sure that you could figure it out on your own, but it definitely builds the premise of where we are going to go with this. 6 plus 4 is my initial problem. I'm going to use counters on the left-hand side of the screen here to show you how we can actually model this problem, and then we can explain how to get our answer. If I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positives that I am working with, we know that the 6 is positive because any number is positive unless we are told otherwise. Since I have 6 positives and I have to add, that's what the plus sign means, is to add 4 as well, 4 more positives, excuse me. Now the question becomes, how many total do I have? And that's pretty simple. We can figure that out. We can draw a line around all of these and say, hey, together, all of these, if I can get them to move properly, are 10. And that's very simple. So I want you to keep this premise in mind as we work forward and we go through all of these things that we're going to be doing today. So let me go ahead and draw a line in between these two so that we can differentiate what we're working with. We're going to start with 0. Our initial number is 0. We're going to start with 0 as our initial number. Well, since 0 is not a number, I apologize for the bell. Since 0 is not a number, we're going to start with nothing. So I need to add 4. That's easy. Well, if I can get it to draw properly. So that's easy. We literally bring in 4 of our numbers. I should have probably put these under my positive 4 instead of below the 0, but that's okay. I think you understand what we're working with here. I started off with nothing, and now I have a positive 4. Now, I want to explain why I'm bringing negatives into this. When we deal with negative numbers, I'm going to take my initial number that I am starting with. In this particular case, it is 12. And that 12 is positive because it shows us, or it tells us that it's positive because it's not a negative sign. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, and we are going to start with 12 positives. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. But then I need to add, and that's what that plus sign means. We're adding, but what am I adding? I am adding 5 negatives, or negative 5. So I am going to take 5 negatives, and I am going to group them into the same problem that I am currently working. So 1 negative, 2, 3, 4, and 5 negatives. Now, one of the great things about a negative and a positive is that together, a negative and a positive add up to 0. Because if I have a negative 1 and I have a positive 1, they both cancel each other out. So if we can pair all of our negatives with our positives, those add up to zeros. I don't like to count zeros because it just takes too long. I would be way too busy if I was counting each one of these, saying 0, plus 0, plus 0, plus 0, plus 0. That would take way too long for me to work this. So instead, I don't count any of my zeros. I leave my zeros all by themselves. So the question is, what am I left with? And in this particular case, what am I left with on this side now? Because I've paired all of my zeros, or I've paired all of my positives and negatives to make zeros, and now I'm left with how many positives? Let's count them. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So if we take the original problem, 12 plus a negative 5, that is going to give me a total of 7. Is that 7 positive or negative? Well, we can look at our numbers here that we have left over, and we say that all of those numbers are positive. So my answer is in fact positive. Let's move to the other side of the screen. Oh, making a mistake here. Sorry about that. Let's move these, and only these, to the other side of the screen. All right. And now let's go ahead and separate these two out again. So we have two separate problems here. I have a positive 4 and a negative 8. I need to start with my positive 4 because that's what I'm told to start with. I have 4 positives. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I need to add or bring in 8 negatives. If I bring in 8 negatives, I'm going to bring in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, just like I did before, I want to pair my positives with my negatives. So I'm going to pair my positives with my negatives, and these are going to add up to 0. I don't have to count zeros. But what I am left with after my zeros, let me go ahead and box in my zeros so that we know that we're not counting these. We're not counting these zeros. What am I left with? I am left with 4 negatives. So my answer to this problem is a negative 4. Okay, let's check a couple more. This time we're starting off with a negative number. We have a negative 4 plus 2. So just like before, we need to start off with what we actually start off with. But this time it's a negative number. So I want to start with 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now that I have 4 negatives, I need to add, and that's what that sign means, the plus sign, positives, 2 of them. Because remember, any number is positive unless it tells us that it's negative. So I need to add 2 positives. If I add 2 positives here, again, my positives are going to join with my negatives and cancel each other out. So I'm going to be left with a positive and a negative, a positive and a negative. Those are going to cancel each other out. Let me draw a box around those so that we don't count those, or a circle, I guess. What am I left with? Well, in this particular case, I have 2 negatives. And that makes sense. If we had 2 additional negatives left over, because we started off with 4, and we added 2 positives, and those 2 positives canceled out 2 of those negatives. So let's go to the other side of the screen and work this problem. We have a negative 4 and a positive 9. If we combine those, first of all, we got to start with our negative 4. So let's get our negative 4 out there. And then we're going to add, what are we adding? We're adding we're adding a positive 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Now we need to pair all of our negatives and positives together. So we're going to pair our positives with our negatives, creating zeros. And again, I'm not going to count any of these, sorry about that. I'm not going to count any of these zeros because it would just take me way too much time. Instead, I'm going to be left with the 5 positives that I'm going to count over here on the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my answer is a positive 5. Now, I do not need to write a positive sign because all numbers are positive unless we tell you otherwise. So we got a couple more to work with whenever we're talking about addition. We have a negative 4 plus a negative 5. This one's a little different because both numbers are negative. So let's see how this works out. We're going to start with 4 negatives because that's what our problem tells us where we're going to start. 4 negatives. Then I am going to add 5 negatives. I guess technically I should have some parentheses here to tell us that this is actually something different, because I should have a parenthesis around the negative sign or the negative number, since we are adding a negative. I'll do that for both of them, and we'll even separate both sides. Now that I've got my -4 on the left side where I'm starting, I need to add. Well, what am I adding? I'm adding 5 negatives. So let's go ahead and add 5 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now we try and cancel out. Wait a second, we don't have any positives to cancel out with. So we're going to be left with nothing but the negatives. So how many negatives do I have total? Well, I have 4 on this side, and I have, that didn't work. For some reason, my pen's not working. So I have 4 on this side, and I have 5 right here. So if I combine those together, I'm going to get 9. But it's not just 9. We said that those numbers are positive unless we say different. Since each one of these are negative numbers, this is a -9. Let's continue on with the same thing on the other side. Here we have a -8 plus 5. We can do the same thing. Let's start off with, let's start off with our -8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we are going to add another -5. So we're going to add 5 more negatives. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now that we have added all of these together, are there any positives that we can join together to make 0? No, we only have negative numbers. So we're going to have a -8 and a -5. We're going to add those together, and it's going to make a bigger negative number. We're going to end up with a -13 because I have a -5 and a -8. I combine those together, and I end up with -13. Okay. Guys, I hope this really helps you guys understand adding and subtracting with negative numbers. I guess I should say adding. Subtracting will be in the next video, and I hope to see you there.